Hello. Today's date is November 30th, 2017. My name is Nikki Gerard, and I'm a graduate student in Salem State University History Program. I have the great pleasure of being joined by Dr. Geoffrey Woodward. We're here today as part of the Salem Witch Trials Descendant Oral History Project. Good afternoon, Geoffrey. I'd like to start with your early life and family memories. Not only do you have a historic connection to Salem, but the Woodward family has been part of Newton for 350 years. I see you were born in Cambridge and currently live in Newton. Where exactly did you grow up?
I grew up in Newton.
In Newton? What did you think of that area?
I like it. I've always grew up thinking maybe the grass was greener elsewhere, but then in the end, having traveled to dozens of different countries, I think Newton is the nicest city I've ever been in, actually.
So tell me a little about your family. What did your family do for a living?
My father was a hospital administrator at the New England Baptist Hospital, where the library is named after him. And my mother did a graduate degree at Columbia University and worked in as libraries, several libraries.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have a sister, and she's vice chairman of the Department of Radiology at Washington University in St. Louis.
Nice. Are you close to her?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you attended Harvard University. What made you apply there?
I guess it was near home.
So what did you study when you were there?
I did biology and a lot of history, too.
Mm-hmm. Did you finish your PhD there?
No, I did at the University of Cambridge.
Okay.
In England.
Wow, that's nice.
Actually, where the founder ancestor Woodwards, who came here, is on the Founders Monument in Watertown Square, was married to Rose Stewart, actually, in Cambridge. So they were all from Suffolk. So 90% of the Estes and the Woodwards, they all came from Suffolk. So it's a mass migration from East Anglia,
Mm-hmm.
So essentially everybody comes originally from East Anglia. The Estes came in 1635, the Woodwards came in 1634.
Wow. So after you graduated from Harvard, you went on to Oxford?
Cambridge.
To Cambridge?
Yeah.
So, and you finished your PhD there?
Yes, I did it in the department where Andrew Huxley, who won the Nobel Prize for Action Potential, was. I used to see him every day, climbing 3 steps at a time up the stairwell. And he's the half-brother, was Aldo Huxley, and then his grandfather was Thomas Huxley.
So did you find that part of your education satisfying?
Yes, I enjoyed Cambridge very much. It has a very sort of, feels like you're at home almost. I mean, the British don't like their places being called quaint, but they do have a sort of cozy, very cozy feel to it.
So after you graduated, did you go directly into a career?
Yes, I went to Washington and worked at the National Institutes of Health and also worked across the street at Walter Reed, the new Walter Reed.
Did you find that satisfying?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What were some of your career highlights?
I think a lot of my publications have been cited hundreds of times, so they've made an impact in the field. Most of them are related to cell receptor signaling.
So I understand that you learned a lot about your relation to Marytown Eastie at an early age due to your father's affiliation with the New England Historical and Genealogical Society. What exactly did he tell you about this connection?
Well, he repeatedly mentioned, the fact that it has nothing to do with witches, he would say. He would say that essentially it was a land dispute between the Putnams, and one way of declaring, well, obtaining land, actually, from someone was to accuse them of being a witch, because spectral evidence was admissible in a court of law. So essentially all you had to do is get one of your relatives to act like they're possessed from these people, and sort of when the judge says, you know, who's possessing you, you just point at the person you want the land from. And so it's not, I'd like to write a book about the fact that nobody seems to, I don't think there's been a book written, because there are actually court records 5 years earlier that show that all of the accused had sued the Putnams for stealing wood, timber, because it required 3 acres worth of wood to heat a single home in those days. And they were actually from Topsfield. So there were 3 sisters, Marytown SD, of which I am a direct descendant of, Rebecca Town Nurse, and Sarah Town Cloyes. And the home, she survived it, Sarah Cloyes. She changed her name to Cloyes, and she fled to Framingham, and the home still stands there, and the Town Family Association is trying to save it, but it's on Salem End Road. It was owned by the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Massachusetts at that time. Mind you, also, the son of Mary Esty, the home of which she fled to the night before she was taken to be hung, that home still stands too, and was owned by a senator from the state of Massachusetts. So essentially, they've sort of traveled in, you know, they've been protected in, you know, by prominent circles, I think, in the, I mean, people, he was, Professor Darien was mentioning about social justice, but these people that were hung, they were compensated and remunerated. Not much compared to a life being taken, but I think that people realized, you know, the government sort of looked after the descendants. If not, you know, by giving them their land or purchasing their, you know, the house and living in it after they were dead. But
So when you learned a lot of this from your father about being a descendant of one of the falsely accused women, how did you feel about that? Did you have any?
Well, I felt a great sense of pride. My mother said, she told me, you know, I wouldn't be telling, because people in their small-mindedness misinterpret this. So, I mean, I have great pride because Edmund Morgan is a professor of history at Yale University. He wrote a book called American Heroes. And he has a whole chapter on Mary Esty. And essentially, her heroism is described as her ability to stand up, you know, to stand up to the judge, and said, essentially, it was called her self-denying speech, in which she says, you know, go ahead and kill me, but don't let this atrocity occur to others, and that I'm not guilty. So she wasn't, so the whole story is, you know, that if you declared yourself guilty, you saved yourself. But she was willing to tell the truth. Giles Corey also sort of stood up, but he had sort of a more, I don't know, conflicting history, I guess, as far as, you know. But Mary Esty was a devout Christian. She was a devout Puritan. And I think her son took, you know, rowed a boat, picked up her body from the site where I went to the memorial, Proctor's Ledge, And apparently she's buried somewhere behind the Rebecca Nurse home in an unmarked grave. But I always thought of it as a thing of pride.
Okay.
So there are a few people who sometimes would, they don't know the history, so and the whole issue of using the word witch, I think, should be abolished from the vocabulary, because essentially the history of it had nothing to do with witches. These were devout Puritans. They were, they were very Christian.
Mm-hmm. So you never had a lot of like anger or, or
No,
the
actually
injustice,
a lot of pride, because
I
I think, it says in the Bible that those who follow God will suffer persecution in life. And I think she suffered persecution because she was a follower. But I think part of the issue now, more recently that I've sort of reflected, is I'd like to learn more about the court action that took place between those 19 people and the Putnams. And Mr. Putnam had a grievance, and he wanted revenge. He was sort of written out of his father's will, and he's bitter, and he just wanted to lash out at anybody. And so anybody who had done something to him, he wanted to lash out at. And he was willing to get John Parrish, or the minister, Reverend Parrish,
Mm-hmm.
on board with him. And, or vice versa, I guess. And so I think that it was a man who was very disturbed, who had a lot of anger, and he wanted to compensate for that. He was aggrieved. And so I think the thing is the people who took the Putnams to court, I don't know if that was in reflection, to make someone who's already aggrieved more aggrieved. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But I don't know. So I don't know that. That's why I'd like to. That's one of my goals in life, is to write a book about that, to find out actually what the relationship was. Because people talk about the relationship, but they don't really show documents to prove, And I'm sure it exists in the court records of Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. So did all of this spark an interest in your learning more about American history? Obviously, you've read a lot.
Yes, my father was a life member of the New England Historic. He was always talking about history every day. My mother was a history major. I did history. Yeah, they all had a passion for history. Even though we do biology, when we come home we discuss history, I guess.
So based on what you've been saying, did you conduct a lot of your own research on the Town family?
Well, my father, my line has been very documented. So essentially, my line also were pioneers. So it is, as I said, it's not just being the fact that you're being hung as a witch. So they went on to, they were the first settlers of Lake County, Illinois. So they migrated south, and I know a lot of the Estes. So there's an Estes Farm Road in Newton. There is couple Estes in the West Parish Cemetery in Newton. There are 26 Woodwards in the East Parish Cemetery, all related. And so they migrated, and Sarah Cloyce wound up in Framingham. So you'd say to yourself, how on earth did someone go from Salem to Framingham? Or how did they get there? But a lot of them went down to then Stoughton, and then the ones from Stoughton was the first pioneer to Moses Estes to settle one of the first settlers of Lake County, Illinois, and then moved from Lake County to Lake County, Indiana. and he owned hundreds of thousands, literally thousands of acres. So a lot of these were land grants. So the government just said, hey, anybody wants all this land. So on the Woodward side too, they were the first settlers of Michigan. They were the first settlers of well, I guess not technically Illinois, but they were they were the first settlers of Nebraska. Actually, one town was going to be called after them. My father actually was born raised in Pasadena.
Okay. So is that how you uncovered a lot of the information about your ancestors? Was through the migration?
Well, no. So it wasn't uncovering. So my grandmother was a little bit. She's so much. I mean, she's a little bit. She was a Christian, but she sort of delved in a little bit of this. Sort of the thinking. At the time, and she changed her name from Cecil Esty to Mary Esty, and she thought she was the reincarnation of Mary Esty, actually. And actually, on her death certificate, you wouldn't know that she was actually born Cecil Esty. But the thing is that she thought she wrote a letter. I have a letter that she wrote in which she talks about thinking of herself as the reincarnation of Mary Esty.
Interesting. So did you work with any other groups, ancestor groups, genealogy groups, or is this really just mostly family-based?
No, I think this has always been by word of mouth transferred down, and I mean we had a Drury Bible that was Esty based. I have actually a town Bible from the early 1800s. Family Bible. One person asked me, what on earth is a family Bible? But a family Bible, usually they put, you add your name to the genealogy in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And we have in our home, I have at least 50 books on Woodwards and at least 20 books on Estes.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all documented. So this one. So I was named after I only learned that later, that actually was named after the father of Mary Esty, Geoffrey Esty. So my middle name is Esty, and then her great-grandfather was Geoffrey Esty too. And Gay Esty Bangs actually has a chapter on Geoffrey Esty here. And it talks about him. So Isaac Esty of Topsfield and some of his descendants. And this is, starts with, where one Geoffrey Esty was granted 20 acres of land in the year 1636. It says, from the Essex County Registry of Deeds, we copy the following. Geoffrey Esty has sold the arbage or after feeding of the fire acre lot to Henry Bullock. But essentially, yeah, I'd say we're sort of obsessed with our. So it's not like researching it. It's just,
right.
It was like a daily discussion almost.
Okay. So has any of this overall knowledge informed your understanding of the trials better, or has any of this changed over time? It sounds like it might have.
As I've told you, it was all vindictive sort of grievance on the part of Thomas Putnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trials, I mean, it makes me realize that, I mean, I forget the name of the judge. He was also...
Stoughton?
No, he was...
Hawthorne?
He would know. But the judge, essentially in the trials, he was, he was a sort of very pompous, arrogant Puritan, and he was also, I believe, at one point the president of Harvard, And essentially he just wanted to be right, you know. In other words, he wanted to act like he knew what he was doing. And he believed in spectral evidence too, which, you know, it's sort of surprising because Christianity, and particularly Puritan Christianity, was very fact-based. Do you know what I'm saying? It was very evidence-based. And to say that spectral evidence is a form of evidence or facts is pure nonsense. I mean, it's superstition. It has nothing to do with facts. And so this Thomas Putnam was able to manipulate the arrogance of the population at the time, the judge, and he was able to use it to his advantage. I mean, I do see instances of, I know when Thomas Putnam was born, and I'm not superstitious. I know the month he was born, and I know sort of people who act like Thomas Putnam, and they sort of lack an identity of their own, and they just feed off of people's insecurities or subconscious to their advantage. And I mean, I'm not superstitious, but I'm saying there is, you know, in history they do have, some people don't believe in it, but you can sort of do psychological profiles, you know, of people from the past. And I would say that Thomas Putnam was a very small-minded man who was able to manipulate people's fears and insecurities to have them believe in spectral evidence, and well, he knew that they believed in it, so he's just sort of fed them what they wanted to hear. And I don't like people who sort of feed you what you just want to hear, because I can tell you that's not what the Estes are about, and it's not what Mary Esty was about. It's not what I'm about either. And I can tell you I've had many Mary Esty moments in my life where I don't tell people what they want to hear, but I tell people what I feel is true and what is, you know. And I think the whole thing about Puritans was truth, you know. On the crest of Harvard, it's veritas, which is truth. And underneath it, they took off the motto, what was Christo et Ecclesia, which was in Latin for Christ, truth for Christ and the Church. And I think that's only what Mary Esty ever stood for. I think it's what every generation of Esty has stood for. I mean, I've looked at the parish records of every Esty, every Woodward, from 1635, 1634 till now. And they've all been faithful to the truth, you know, standing up for the truth. And so I think that's what it's all about. It's nothing less than standing up for the truth.
Okay. So I guess I'll shift gears a little. Do you know other descendants from the trial? Do you know other people?
I'm a member of the Town Family Association.
Okay.
I've attended one of their meetings when they held it here. I do know my father had 8 aunts, and they're all Estes. And so my grandmother had 8 sisters,
Wow.
and they're all Estes. They all talk about it. They're all fascinated by it. They have, as I told you, they gave us a Bible, but my sister took that out to Missouri. But I have another town Bible, so. But yeah, they're very aware of their Esty connection, and they're very willing to talk about it. My great-grandmother she was the first graduate of the University of Southern California Law School. Her married name was Mary Thor. And I think my grandmother too, they were sort of very strong women. Estes are all very, you know, they served in World War II. They're very strong.
Wow.
So these are not a weak group of people, do you know what I'm saying? They're very pioneers and very strong. And Mary Thor was a very strong lady. I met her. She was the first graduate of the University of California Law School.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So have you had the opportunity to visit some of the historic sites or memorials in Danvers and Salem?
Yes, so I have all the bench where Mary Estes' name is on, and I've been to Proctor's Ledge. I shook hands with Kimberly Driscoll, the mayor, at the ceremony. I mean, my father going to work, actually on the back of Mission Hill, there's an Estes Street, and used to always drive up it. But, I mean, my father used to tell me that if anybody has the name Estes, they're all related to us. So unlike Woodward, there were like 5 original Woodwards. Richard was the one that came to Boston, and then there were 4 others. But if they're an Estes, you don't need to do the genealogy. You're automatically related.
So did you have any particular feelings when you visited some of these memorial sites? Did it evoke anything particular?
Well, I once went around, where the stones are behind the PBD6 Museum, and there was a line of people going around looking at everything. But I just got the feeling that a lot of this history, these people know nothing about it. Do you know what I'm saying? They've not been schooled in it. And then, I've worked at a place and I've seen people dressed up in costume and they're traveling to Salem, and it's like, literally, I've been told, thousands of people, and they're sort of like, sort of edgy type of people with nose rings and tattoos, and they sort of, I think, do disgrace to the history. Do you know what I'm saying? I do sort of feel, and I've only felt that more recently.
Okay.
I didn't know about all these people, that it's been made into sort of like a cult, of sort of alternative, edgy people who like tattoos and pierced nose rings and
Yeah,
But-
there is the old Salem, the history,
right.
and there's the new Salem with the new witch.
Right, and they
Karma,
put
so-
the logo on the police car and everything.
Right, so
City.
you're the witch-oriented tourist industry in Salem
Well,
is...
I only learned about that sort of very recently. So, I mean, I've been sort of, my parents sort of kept us in this sheltered bubble. And so I learned the real sort of history of the whole thing. And as I told you, I have, 8 aunts, or great aunts, I guess, who all share the history and they love talking about it.
Okay. So I did read a profound quote from you at the Proctor's Ledge dedication in July of 2017, where you said, quote, "Government should represent the people. It shouldn't be against the people like they were in the Salem witch trials," end quote. So can you elaborate on what you were thinking and feeling at the time when you said that?
Well, as I told you, the judge he's a Harvard graduate, he's very arrogant, and he was for himself, And you find a lot of people, I mean, sort of sociopaths tend to more go into, I've been told, medicine and the ministry than they do into government. But I think, he was wanting to sort of bolster his standing in the community. And he had a very high standing, but in other words, he wasn't willing to question himself. And so I think you do find that in government, but I don't, in America, I think you find less of it now. I think if anything, I mean, the whole situation, the McCarthy hearings, I mean, I think people, they equate things to the Salem witch trials, and I think, you know, in history we do sort of, but I think this is more you know, an individual, people go on witch hunts, you know, they try to,
Right.
to vilify people for certain things, and I think that the government does this. I mean, one thing about working for federal government, and this is one thing that I've noticed, is that, you know, on the, I work for HHS and the DoD, and the DoD, I mean, the HHS is great, you know, everybody has a clear objective, and it's nothing personal, you're just trying to improve the health of the, you know, the citizenry of the country, and it's great, because it's a great cause. The DoD, they have this fetish of doing, just like, you know, with the current president, they do investigations, you know what I'm saying? And it's like every week there's a new investigation, and somebody's investigating, and they say, oh, that you shouldn't take that as a bad thing, it's just good that we're doing an investigation. Well, it's like, well, yes, but why, you know, and is it merited, or is it because somebody made some false accusation? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I think you see a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I even asked once my boss, you know, why can't we, if an investigation, if you're found not guilty, why can't you charge a person for falsely making an accusation? And he said, well, no, you can't do that. And I guess technically that's legally called retaliation. But the thing is, I just think, you know, if anything, that's sort of the parallel I've made.
Okay, so the parallel between, there's still a consistency between the way the government was treating the people they accused of witchcraft, and still takes place today, you feel?
Well, I think, yeah, I think in some investigations, so I had a friend who was a lawyer, and, you know, in Harvard Square, we lived in a student house. He wanted to take someone to court for relieving themselves on the driveway. And this sort of, you know, clerk sort of threw it out and said, you know, it was nuts. And I thought he was nuts. He was from Topsfield, but actually lives right, and his home is right near Topsfield Center. Actually, it's the first home out on the common, Topsfield Common. And I thought he was nuts too. It's like, well, what is this? Why do we, you don't have to take someone to a court of law for relieving themselves on a driveway, you know. And I just think what I noticed, you know, working in Washington is that anybody can make an accusation against somebody else, and then there has to be an investigation. And I think it should just be thrown out. The person should be declared a nutcase for making the accusation and just throw it out. I think you see now with this whole, you know, what is it, Mike Lauer or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and Charlie Rose and all these other people, that, you know, maybe there's substantiation to all these things. But it used to be that, you know, there was, I mean, I'm just saying that accusations should be investigated, but they should be done in a more, they're used as a weapon. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Thomas Putnam was using the accusation against these people as a weapon. He wanted to get back at them. He was upset. He was ticked off. They had taken him to court 5 years earlier for stealing wood. He was denied, you know, it was written out of his father's will. And he was angry at these people. So I'm just saying, people do wrong things, and those should be legitimately investigated, but there should be a mechanism of screening, you know, grievances and investigations.
Mm-hmm.
That's my point.
Okay. So, with your history and knowledge, how do you think it would feel to discover you were a descendant of one of those accusers?
I would be very humiliated, and I would feel as though, I mean, as I told you, I don't know if I told you, I was driving around the Rebecca Nurse home, and I rolled down my window. A lady was walking her dog, and I asked her, "Are you relation to the towns at all, or the nurses?" Thinking because she lived there. She said, "No, I'm a Putnam." And I thought to myself, and and she. And they did take over. So there are a lot of there's a Putnam bakery. Everything around here is named Putnam. So in the end, they won. But if it's material blessings is winning, but I think spiritual blessings are more the definition of winning. And I think the towns and the Esseys had the spiritual blessings, and the Putnams might have had the material blessings from accusing all these people, but they were denied the spiritual blessings because it is a mark left on them for history that they have to, live with.
So what do you think are the most important lessons from the trials?
I think what I just said, actually, about it's nothing wrong with having investigations, but they should be screened. And the motive of the investigation should be screened. Mm-hmm. So maybe Matt Lauer, I guess people, they have evidence, physical evidence, and they say, okay, he did this, he did that, whatever. With Charlie Rose, maybe they have physical evidence. But I knew in government a lot of foreigners, and I was actually one of the minority of American-born people. A lot of foreigners manipulate our system to have investigations. And it's just because they're insecure, they want to claim a right to something, or they have they want to don't want to be fired, so if you don't you make an investigation according to federal law, you can't be fired during any of your, so they know that. And so, but essentially, what about all the people who are unjustly accused by these people? Don't they have rights too? And I think in our system, we need to screen investigations. So I don't think we've learned, no. I think we need to say, is there any merit to this investigation? Why should we have an investigation? And then you have the opposite argument saying, well, nobody investigated and all these horrors were occurring, but still there should be some pre-screening, I think. Not everything should be investigated or tried. So in America we have the philosophy that everybody should have their day in court. And I don't think everybody should. Do you know what I'm saying? That's my point.
Okay. So
there should be merit to their day in court. In other words, there should be evidence. Mm-hmm. But if injustice has occurred, then they should have their day in court.
Okay. So if you had the ability to communicate with Mary Esty, like
Esty.
Well,
yeah.
It's pronounced both ways.
Well,
what might you ask her?
I wouldn't ask her anything. I would congratulate her on a job well done, and I would say that you've it's in your genes, and you've created a legacy of numerous generations who've gone on to do exactly how you've done, mm-hmm. and have stood up to injustice and been heroes.
Good. So if you have children or other descendants, will they continue to maintain your connection with your family's historic past?
Absolutely. This is why I got this book recently, mm-hmm. from the Topsfield Historical Club, because my father named me after Geoffrey Esty, and so I have a whole chapter named after myself in here. So I will definitely pass this on to my children. And there's a chapter by Edmund Morgan, who died recently. He was in his 90s when he wrote this book. He was a professor of Yale, history rather, at Yale. And it's one of his last books that he wrote. And he put a whole chapter. I wonder why it took him 90 years to write a chapter on Mary Esty, but if it took him, it's an accumulation of thought, he says. over all that time. And I think it's the fact that she's been elevated to hero status along with George Washington, I think is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's true.
So are there any other topics we didn't cover that you might want to comment on?
No, but I do think that the town of Salem should do less, about talking about witches and more talking about heroism. And I think if we talk about heroism, then I think we got the subject right.
Okay, that's great. So anyway, I want to thank you, Dr. Woodward, for participating in our oral history project. Thank you.
Thank you.